Welcome to this PowerPoint video on 7 Hurdles to Successful Execution Management. This presentation is based on an article of the same name, authored by Miles Kearson and Gary Tomlinson. I'm Gary Tomlinson, and I'll be your narrator for today's presentation. Although these 7 hurdles are in the context of execution management, they are equally applicable in any type of change management. The statistic I'm about to share with you is frequently quoted in business books on the subject of strategy execution. It states that 90% of organizations fail to execute on their strategies. Well, whether that figure actually is 90%, 80%, 70%, or 60% doesn't matter. It's still very clear that the biggest inhibitor to business success is the inability to execute on strategy. Less than 1% of organizations have an effective system that's been specifically designed to manage execution down to an individual level. And that's an important distinction because no matter how you slice it, execution happens at an individual level. And as Michael Gerber states in his book, The E-Myth Manager, without a system, you're playing Russian roulette with the results. After many years of conversations with and consulting to senior executives on execution management systems, we have concluded that there's extraordinary resistance in organizations to addressing and getting better at execution. As logical and beneficial that adopting such a system seems to be, not everybody embraces it, and many out and out fiercely resist. And for those who do understand the importance of this and have brought an execution management system into their organizations, they often run into some significant hurdles to implementing it along the way. A hurdle, of course, is something you have to jump over in order to reach the finish line, or according to the dictionary, it's a problem you must solve or deal with before you can make progress. We've identified 7 hurdles that you need to solve or deal with in order to be successful in implementing execution management. Hurdle 1. Every organization has an execution management system. That's right. Every organization has one, or better stated, thinks they have one. The problem is this. It's not really a system. It's a bunch of, at best, loosely related individual vehicles for accomplishing different apparent needs to manage execution. One CEO laughed out loud when we told him this, and he goes, "Yeah, but it's a rabble." We loved that word, rabble. I think it was the first time we ever heard it spoken in a sentence. Yes, it is a disorderly mess, and we picture it something like this. Every organization has some or all of these elements in place that they use to manage execution, and they think of it as a system, but it isn't. As I said earlier, less than 1% of organizations have a true execution management system in place. The point here is this. When a senior executive says they already have a system, it constitutes a form of resistance that we call the first hurdle. It's important to understand the truth of what you actually have. If you think you have a system in place, but you don't, then you're going to go on doing what you've been doing and continue getting the same results. Hurdle number 2 is people who have never been held accountable are terrified of the idea of being held accountable. This means almost everybody. Now, most people have been given accountability for activities or to oversee activities, and that's different than accountability for results. When you're accountable for results, it means you have to deliver, and if you don't, you're failing at your job, and there's going to be consequences, either real or perceived. Only a small percentage of people who comprise the workforce have had this kind of accountability. For example, salespeople who are on 100% commission, and some entrepreneurs. If you're in a position where you manage others, don't make the mistake of underestimating the power of terror. The fear of being held accountable can be very strong and often not conscious. For example, if you tell an employee you're making a change and that from now on you're judging them on whether or not they're producing specific results, their fear for many of them is they won't be able to do this, that they'll fail, that they'll be exposed and it'll be found out that they're not as competent as everyone believed they were. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to everyone, but we've seen this kind of fear cause significant resistance to the organizational intent to improve performance by managing execution. And for some, being held accountable can be the news that tells them it's time to find a new job. Accountability, or being held accountable, man, that's not the boogeyman. Most people who have been held accountable for results in a good way will tell you that once you've gotten used to it, you'll never go back to the way it was. Now note the qualifier, in a good way. Beating people up, embarrassing them for not coming through, berating them in front of others are just a few examples of the bad way. We have one client that calls what he does gentle accountability. And boy, does it work. He's in charge of the largest company in his industry, one that consistently gets superior results, and one that has repeatedly been awarded best places to work. Accountability is the cornerstone of successful execution management. Hurdle number 3 is people don't keep their promises. If you're thinking right now, I keep my promises, you're in the majority who think that. However, try this challenge. Spend the next week being observant of all the promises you make, big and small. This includes all the times you say I will, or I'll get that done, or okay to a request, because if you say you're going to do something, that counts as a promise. Now during this challenge, pay attention to how often you didn't follow through on your promises. You'll be surprised by the results. Most of us believe we're good people and that we keep our promises. At least that's our intent. The problem is, as long as we believe we always keep our promises, we don't recognize that we don't always do so. And if we don't recognize this, then the chances of getting better at keeping our promises, that is, doing what we said we were going to do, are limited. In other words, you might tell yourself, well, I keep my promises, therefore I don't have to get better at it. Execution can be said to be nothing more than doing what you said you'd do in the time frame in which you said you'd do it. Getting better at keeping our promises is an essential practice for improvement. Hurdle number 4. Above all, most people really just want to be comfortable. Much of the resistance to change seems to come from simply not wanting to be bothered by needing to adjust to something new. This resistance is usually reactionary and often blocks the person's willingness to even listen to why the change needs to happen. People get used to their jobs, they feel good about what they do, and they have a certain routine. Then comes along a manager or an executive who says, we're going to do things differently around here, and then adds, we're going to ensure that everyone has measurable goals that they'll be accountable to accomplish. Well, that's a double whammy. First, their stability, their comfortability is threatened, and second, their very ability to be successful at the job is in question. Most people at work just wish you'd leave them alone and let them do the job that they know how to do. So when a big change is announced, many of them will just be quiet, will sit back, assuming that this too shall pass. This is important to know so you can help find ways to get them off the sidelines and into the game. Hurdle number 5. The organizational drift is built on avoiding discomfort. If you shy away from using the word culture, as in corporate culture, and look for what is actually happening in organizations without the bias that goes with that word, some interesting things open up as possibilities. What most people call culture, we call the drift. For example, if you go to a lake and float on your back in the drift, guess in which direction your body will move. It's the same with an organization. They all have their own drift, the direction everything is going in. It's how things work around here. The tendency in most organizations is to keep things as they are, to maintain the status quo. In most organizations, the drift is very strong in the direction of no change here. If you do anything that's going to change things, like implement an execution management system, it helps to know you're starting to waken the sleeping dragon, the drift, and it will rear its ugly head and eat you alive if it can. Hurdle number 6 is the language of execution must change. Almost all the words associated with execution have negative connotations in our culture, beginning with the word execution itself, which of course has another meaning, chopping off heads. We've already addressed accountability, which for many people means somebody is going to beat me up if I don't do what I was told to do. And even worse, the phrase hold people accountable, which might mean if I start calling people on their failure to deliver, they're going to start calling me on mine. You can add your own words such as discipline, commitment, promises, stretch targets, initiatives, responsibility, and goals, and ask yourself what you might hear when you hear each one. Actually, we don't so much need to change the words. Rather, we need to be clear about what we mean when we use them. We need to redefine them in the context of getting better at execution, of accomplishing our goals, our initiatives, our visions. Hurdle number 7 is a lack of courage and commitment on the part of the senior executive. Execution management systems are not for the faint of heart. They require a senior leader that understands that he or she is the one person who has the ultimate accountability for the success of the enterprise. First, he or she must be strong enough to make the decision to move forward, and once made, must have the strength to carry through with it. This begins before you even get started. As a senior leader, it's usually a terrific idea to empower your team, to involve them as much as you can in the decisions that you make. However, there are some decisions that you can't make by going to the team and discussing them. The decision to go forward with implementing an execution management system is one of them. Here's the reason why. If you run it by your leadership team first, we can pretty much guarantee there will be one or more of your team members who have an emotional reaction to it. They'll have just enough insecurity about this amount of visibility and accountability to try to talk you out of it. They'll say something that sounds logical and intelligent, like, we do all right. We're pretty good at execution. We've tried these kinds of consulting interventions before and they don't stick. I think we should just focus on it more ourselves, or I can't ask my people to do one more thing. The reality is that they're being driven by one or more of the other 6 hurdles. The point here is this. If you're aware that you're going to disturb the sleeping dragon, the status quo, and that there are some decisions you'll need to make on your own without consulting others first, you'll have the courage and the commitment to make the decision to move forward and then figure out how to get your team on board. As a senior leader, you have to know that these hurdles are at work. If you don't, and you're trying to significantly improve performance by improving the organization's ability to execute, you're going to run into resistance that you won't even see coming. Unfortunately, merely being aware of these hurdles doesn't fix the problem any more than knowing that you're nearsighted helps you to see better. The real question is, how can you move more skillfully through these hurdles or over them? The short answer is you have to put actual processes in place to overcome them. And that's where an execution management system comes into play. Just over a decade ago, the book by Larry Bossidy and Rand Shram entitled Execution, The Discipline of Getting Things Done was published. It was a big seller and one of the first books on the subject of execution. We've come a long way since then. There have been numerous books on the subject that have come out, and there's also been several impressive execution management systems that have been developed for the first time to help solve the issue of organizations' inabilities to execute on their strategy. Anecdotally, it used to be that when you talked to an executive about execution or execution management systems, you just might as well have been talking about space aliens for all the resonance you were sensing. Now it gets people's attention. We're reading the writing on the wall here. The age of execution is upon us. I hope you'd enjoyed this presentation. If you're interested in learning more about execution management and execution management systems, please get in touch. You can do so by sending me an email at gary@gary-tomlinson.com or giving me a call at 919-847-6235. I'll leave you with this last thought. The age of execution is upon us because the biggest inhibitor to business success is the inability to execute on strategy.